Test. Yeah, that works. Does it work? It does work. Hurrah! Can you hear me now?
You could be at something every week, couldn't you?
Members of the Council, will they silence as all rise for the right worshipful, the ceremonial bell?
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Sorry that we're a bit delayed, but it was beyond nothing to do with me, Councillor. To do with these, because I don't need. So welcome everybody. As I say, apologies for the delay. I'm now going to ask Reverend Allison to say prayers.
Thank you for your invitation. At the start of this autumn season, a time of endings and beginnings, of putting aside and picking up, we thank you for all that has gone before and ask that you will be with us in all that is to come. We give thanks for the position of authority your people have entrusted us with and the responsibility that gives. Help us to stand up for the oppressed, fight for the marginalised, seek justice and understanding for those in all kinds of trouble. Give us the wisdom to use the resources available to us wisely, a conscience to act bravely rather than to seek our own reward, and a humility to serve others. We, your people, O Lord, come from many different backgrounds and cultures. On this International Day of Peace, give us tolerance and understanding, patience and respect for one another and our differences. Continue to raise up people who will inspire, lead and break down boundaries. Set an example of mutual trust in this fractured world in which we live and share. Bless this meeting here today. We pray for those of this council who are ill or unable to be with us, and remember and give thanks for those who went before us in this tradition of leadership and service. In Jesus' name, amen.
Item 1, announcement of any special announcements or special business. I've not been notified of any announcements this morning, so we'll go on to item 2, which is apologies for council. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, can we just do that again? Councillor Barnes. Was anybody else? Slowly. And the other ones were? The same, were they? All right. Thank you. And Councillor Clark. Right. Tolerance today, I think, isn't it? Declarations of interest. Does anybody have any personal, prejudicial or... Sorry. Can we now take the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of July? Are the minutes of the meeting for the Council held on the 20th of July a correct record? Thank you. All in favour? Thank you. The minutes are correct. Right. Item 5 is receipt of petitions. Do we have any petitions to be received? Councillor Bellamy.
On? Yes. This is on behalf of the residents of Arthur Avenue in Wharton, they're wanting speed bumps on the road.
Right. Item 6, membership of committees. Can I ask the Assistant Director for Legal and Governance to present the revised memberships of committees and panels, after which I will permit members to ask questions.
Sorry, I often don't. Through you, Chair, just to bring this report, which is to note the changes to the appointments by the GMCA AGMA to the outside bodies.
Any questions? No. Those are accepted. Thank you. Item 7. It's again the Assistant Legal Governance to present about the software report. I think we've had a bit of trouble with software this morning.
Yes, again through you, Chair. This is just to advise you of the position with regard to the committee decision management system software, which Council was aware was in train. It's been purchased, it's now being used, and what we're doing is integrating this so that all of the agendas and committee papers for all of the Council's committees and for Council will be produced through this software. The next stage is that this will do the creation and publication of committee minutes, agendas and executive decisions, and that will go live from the end of October. And then phase 2 will be progressed, and that will include a members only section of the intranet site, which members have asked for. And also we'll be able to automate things like registers of interests and of gifts and hospitality, which will make things easier for members to complete. And I understand that for all members using iPads, which I think is everybody, there will be an app which makes it easier to annotate documents and for you to use them more effectively. What we will be looking for is a small group of members to work on user testing as we start to put that into place to make sure we've got all the things in that you wanted and have asked for. And it may well be that, again, subject to anything members say, that the thing to do is use the member training working group, which exists already, as a starting point for that. I think that's all I would want to say, Chair.
Any questions? Any comments? Right. Council is asked to note the report. Thank you. Item 8. This is the lead member of Environment and Community Safety is asked to present the Salford Community Safety Strategy for 2016-19, after which I'll ask members if they would like to ask questions or comments. Thank you, Councillor Lancaster.
all members of the Council in assisting with presenting this report. We've been working in consultation not with just the Crime and Disorder Partnership but with all the partnership boards and all the members of the Council. I circulated provisional documents to all members of the Council just approximately a month ago, and we've had some feedback from that. I've amended the report accordingly, and I'm going to make the point that when it goes out to public consultation, which you will be doing, we want to make sure that we get as much input as we can from the communities to make sure it's a live document and a document which members feel confident on, that we can attack our targets. Some of those targets were set into 5 areas this year: driving down crime, or continue to drive down crime; tackling antisocial behaviour, which we have been continuing with; building the resilient communities; protecting vulnerable people, protecting the vulnerable people, I should say, and reducing reoffending. Those are the 5 categories which we want to concentrate on this year. That doesn't mean that it's the only thing which we need to concentrate on. I've got to say that we've had many successes in the last 3-year period, and in fact, right, what I'm saying is that we've got a 21% reduction in overall crime in the last 5 years, which is a significant reduction. What we want to do is actually continue with some of the work which we've done already this year. And if you take into the last 12 months alone, Operation Project Gulf has had 150 arrests in 12 months from October 2015. Operation Pandora has 28 offenders arrested for fly tipping in the city and public protection orders placed on antisocial behaviour. We've had participatory budgets in most of the wards, in fact all the wards. And with domestic abuse, we've had considerable success in domestic abuse and reduction in domestic abuse. I think that we've had a reasonable 3 years. I've got to say, I wish I was totally confident in the 3-year forward plan. One thing we can't take into account is any projections and police numbers, which can affect the successes that we can have as a partnership. We've had a significant number. At my meeting on Monday night, when members were invited, we had the Deputy Superintendent for Salford actually telling us of the police numbers which have been reduced once again. And that won't help our crime protection, which is important that we actually get our crime figures right and actually tackle the issues which are my concern. However, we can only project for the next 3 years based on the current facilities and current staffing levels. Well, I do make the plea that you support this document and thank every member for their support in producing this document. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor Lancaster. Is there any questions from any member? And is there any comments from any members? Councillor Garrido.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can I welcome the report that Councillor Lancaster has given, which is very detailed, and in particular, can I welcome the 21% overall reduction in crime which we've achieved in this city. I think certainly Greater Manchester Police ought to be congratulated, and certainly the work that this council does in partnership with the police, I think, is very welcome. You won't be surprised to hear, because I raise it nearly every time that this subject comes up, that I still do have concerns over the domestic violence or domestic abuse. Whilst I welcome, in fact, the partnership with MARAC, I still do feel, in fact, that we are somewhat lacking in the way that these crimes are recorded. And if we don't have the information about how they're recorded, it's very difficult to know what progress we're actually making. Now, I'm quite sure we are making some progress. What concerns me is that we don't seem to be able to be sure as to exactly what those figures are. And in fact, if you look at the table on Appendix 1, I think it's on paragraph 4.1, there are no figures attached to that table at all. Now, unless I'm not being very technically proficient. There's no tables attached to any of the items there, and 4.1, which refers, I think, particularly to domestic abuse. Again, there's a list of key indicators, but no information as to what they're expecting to achieve. So I would really like some assurance that we are going to get those targets, something I've been asking for many years now, and we still seem to be short of that information. Thank you.
Councillor Lang.
Yeah. Well, I think Councillor Greeno knows my concern as well. I mean, and all the partnerships concerned about domestic abuse figures. We have had for a considerable amount of time, not just at Salford, the changing government instructions of how we record those figures have been questionable for years. What we have, though, is the figures are produced, and you should have had a copy of it. The monthly figures are actually sent out to all members. In fact, they were handed out to the Crime and Disorder meeting on Monday night at 5 o'clock, which I don't think you were present at, but I'll send you a copy of them. But I am confident that we are tackling domestic abuse quite well, and it's important that those figures are tackled and actually targeted for. Now, what we do is clear targets for what we want to achieve in numbers-wise, and the reporting we have in this new procedure we've now got in place is having some considerable success. However, it's like generally some of the figures, it depends on reporting of those figures and reporting of that information. And in the recent correspondence with the police, we've questioned some of the figures actually which they're producing, and in fact they've now accepted that our figures are correct, and it's our figures which are now going off, not the police's figures. But I do assure you that domestic abuse is something which we clearly are concerned about, and we are watching those figures very closely indeed.
Thank you, Councillor Lancaster. Can we vote on that? Is everybody in favour of the strategy? Thank you. Moving on to item 9, that's Treasury Management Annual Report 2015-16. You've got 10 minutes. Councillor Hines. Could I ask Councillor Hines if you would present the report?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're required to do this under the 2003 Act that we've come to the Council to give an update on the report. Obviously, the key issues that will concern members are the economic background, interest rates, okay, can you hear now? Yes, what will interest Council is the economic background, interest rates, Treasury management position, investment strategy, leasing and capital financing outturn. Of course, what really is the important issues is the monies that we borrow and the rates that we can borrow at. Those are key questions that need to be understood because we obviously have a very, very important capital programme. And you've heard me many times in this chamber say that I think that as a capital programme over the years it has suited this city and its citizens extremely well, not just from the benefits that they get in certain areas of the capital programme, but the investment that it brings in, the jobs that it creates, and importantly, our council tax base is improved greatly by the monies that we engineer through the capital programme. Also, what's interesting is not just the monies that we borrow at, but the monies that we lend out. Now, over the present time, the financial director is very prudent, of course, in the monies that he lends out to get the best monies that we can. And overall, I think that we've done very, very well out of that. Certainly in a climate at the minute where, you know, the pressures that are on either borrowing or lending is extremely difficult. So we watch that very, very carefully. Now, that is the main positions of the report, but if anybody wants to ask any questions on it, I'll do my best to answer. Remember last time, of course, Andy Cheetham raised a question that I hadn't got written down, but hopefully this time I may have. If not, then you'll have to wait till I get that information for you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hines. Are there any questions on the Treasury Management Annual Report? We all happy? No questions? Is there any comments on the annual report? Right. The Council is requested to consider the outturn position and performance of the Treasury Management. Do members agree with the annual report? Thank you. Right. Now, can we move on to... I'll have to stop saying right. Can we now move on to the notice of motion about the British Legion campaign? We've got the mover of the motion, which is Councillor Ord, and that will be seconded by Councillor Morris. So can I ask Councillor Ord to move the notice of motion?
Thank you, Chair. The motion is self-explanatory. I am seeking this Council's support for the Royal British Legion Count Them In campaign. Despite an estimated 1 in 10 of the UK population being members of the armed forces community, there's very limited information about where they are or what their needs might be. Without information on those who are serving, veterans and their family, it's hard to provide them with the support they deserve. The campaign seeks to add questions to the next census to help identify these people and where they live. This is in just the same way as any other community of identity is currently included. From this information, government departments and charities can hopefully address the needs of this community. We should all be aware of the mental health issues suffered by troops, which shell shock identified at least a century ago. But to emphasise the scale of the issue, more veterans of the Falklands campaign have died at their own hands than died in the war itself. There are also substantial issues of homelessness, drug and alcohol dependency, and veterans ending up in prison. Getting post-service employment is also a major challenge, where even getting an entry-level job for skilled employees who once handled equipment costing millions of pounds can prove difficult. These are just a few amongst many issues. To sum up the scale of the problems, a recent report stated that 38% of veterans and their families feel they have actually been disadvantaged through serving their country, which is a completely contrary experience when viewed against the ambitions of the Armed Forces Covenant. We need to improve upon this situation, and I hope you can support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ord. Councillor Morris, second the motion.
I'm grateful to Councillor Ord for bringing this motion to Council, and I'm sure that you will all want to support it. One of the major problems we face is identifying returning and settled veterans. And though it's estimated there are 16,000 veterans in Salford, no one really knows. The MOD are not in a position to release figures, so it's difficult to identify veterans, both for us and our partners. In Salford, we do now ask people who are accessing council services if they've served in the armed forces, and if they agree, we can now signpost them to Veterans Champions. Since the previous City Mayor signed the Covenant in 2013 and appointed Councillor Warner and myself as Veterans Champions on a voluntary basis, we have worked hard to highlight the problems veterans and their families face. This is a team effort, and organisations support one another for the benefit of the Armed Forces family. And I particularly want to thank Joanne Farrell from the Mayor's Office, who again on a voluntary basis is the go-to person for both me, Barry Warner, veterans and our partners. Since 2013, what progress have we made? As a council, we have made changes to the Housing Association policy to assist returning veterans. Our housing providers have been extremely helpful in supporting veterans into homes and we have a veterans champion within supported tenancies that provide direct support to veterans regardless of the time they have left the services. Steps have been taken by the Council to ensure that pensions, military compensation payments are disregarded when accessing housing benefit, local town council tax support and non-residential social care services. In the area of health, the problem with the Covenant becomes apparent when it refers to veterans receiving priority treatment from the NHS. The problem is that the NHS use clinical priority as a basis for treatment, and too few doctors or managers understand that veterans are promised priority care over clinical need. Despite this, there is good work being undertaken in relation to mental health, and recently Greater Manchester secured funding to embed welfare officers within hospitals to support veterans over 65, and there is one officer based at Salford Royal. Achieve Salford Recovery Services, in partnership with Combat Stress, now have a specialist practitioner to work with veterans affected by substance misuse and mental health issues. The Council's Health Improvement Service continues to support veterans to access wellbeing activities, but it is work in progress. There is a particular group of volunteers I'd like to mention, the Salford Armed Forces Veterans Network. In 18 months the group have been operational. They have established themselves as one of the key contacts for veterans across the city, looking for social, emotional and practical support. Network volunteers are present at Swinton Gateway every Monday to give veterans a chance to talk to fellow veterans about their problems and experiences. This type of approach has been very successful in signposting veterans into services while encouraging them to participate in a number of social activities managed by the network. However, the network is spending a great deal of time fundraising, and there are no dedicated funds from government to help local authorities and charities fulfil the principles of the Covenant. Compare this with America, where my nephew is a veteran, can phone up the Veterans Hospital, say I'm having a bad day, and can book himself in for treatment on the same day. It's time for government to face up to the debt we as a country owe our veterans, so that they no longer are a major part of the criminal justice system or left with broken marriages, no homes and no jobs. This motion will be a start, so we will know the scale of the problem, but we also need legislation to fund the very real needs of veterans. I support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. I'll now ask if anybody wishes to speak in this debate, if they could just raise their hands, please. Sorry. Can you just bear with us, Councillor Walsh? Councillor Ferguson.
Councillor Clarkson.
Yeah. The City Mayor.
Councillor Turner.
Councillor Turner. Councillor Lindley. Councillor Warner.
City Mayor as well.
Yeah. Councillor Warner, could you just hold on a second while I get everybody... Sorry, just... sorry. Councillor Bolkine.
Councillor Fletcher.
No, not yet. Councillor Fletcher. I think we've got everybody, so if we could...
Councillor Hines as well.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Hines. Shouting out to be included.
Yeah. I think I've got everybody now, so can we start? Councillor Lindley, you had your hand up first. Would you like to say a few words? Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Those councillors of a certain vintage will remember the Fusiliers Homecoming Parade, which took place just a few yards from here back in 2009. I think when you say the word veteran, I think people come up with a certain image, an older person, probably a man. And actually, my reflection and my main recollection of the Fusiliers parade, and bear in mind I was 26 at the time, was just how young they were. They looked like babies almost, you know, 18, 19, 20-year-old soldiers who'd been out and served our country, and I thought they looked young. And you know, at 26, I was still relatively young myself. I think this motion is a really important step to acknowledging that our veterans do come in all shapes and sizes, young and old, male and female, different needs. And if we're able to identify those needs, we can provide the appropriate support to them to make sure that they can find work, that they can support their children if they need be, that if they have other family issues, that we can provide that support. A lot of them won't need that support, but we need to make sure that those that do can get it. So, from my point of view, I very much commend this motion and all the work that's been done to work towards it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. Could I now ask Councillor Warner to actually speak?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, when we talk about veterans, I was very lucky when I was in the army, because when they come out, we was given somewhere to live. Nowadays, our people that are coming out, the veterans, a lot of them are sleeping rough. We've found some over here sleeping for 18 months near Aldi up here in a hedge, sleeping in a hedge with a sleeping bag. I think it's a disgrace, that. And I'll tell you something else. I'm very annoyed about the government here, because each council signed a covenant. We all signed it to do something for these veterans. Up to date, not a penny has come from the MOD, and I think that's a disgrace. It's very difficult, without money, without getting monies in, to do the job properly, what we need to do. We do get to a lot of veterans, like Margaret said, the Veterans Association, which work with us, they find a lot of cases, and of course there are a lot of them. I go to, as many know in here, I go to prison every fortnight. I speak to a lot of prisoners in there who have been in the forces, and I ask them, I said, can I ask you something? I've been in the forces. When you come out of the army, what makes you come in here, want to come in here? It's not a case of want, they tell me. It's a case of when we come out, you're a number when you go in, and you're a number when you come out. And I knew that. I always knew that. But when they come out, they've nowhere to live. As soon as they spend a bit of money what they've got, they've nothing. They've nothing left, and some of them have not even got families. So what do? They break the law, get took in prison. There's 3 meals a day in there. It's just like in prison, I should suggest it's something like being in the army, because you're living as a family in the army. Every one of them in the army, you're a friend and you're a comrade, that you look after one another and you trust everybody. So in prison, with it being all men, in Forest Park where I go, they feel at home there because they're back in a situation like it was before. But we've got to do something for these people. And I've also asked that not just this notice of motion, because I don't think a notice of motion goes far enough. I've asked, can we get our members of Parliament to get the message that we want them to speak up in Parliament and ask them about what's going on, ask them about these people what are coming out and sleeping rough. They fought for this country. They put their lives on the line. It's not only their lives as well, it's the families' lives as well. Because if you're in a situation, I mean, I was sent to Kenya as a young soldier, and I was on standby for the Belgian Congo, which was a bad place, and Aden and places like that. And your family worry about that. And we should, when they come out, we should look after them now, especially in a day like now. We can do that, you know, but these have not done it. And I'm very, very annoyed about it. But me and Margaret do what we can, and we go all over the place with the Veterans Association. We try and meet these. I met I think the mayor, the last city mayor, owned a place called Orchard in Orchard Buildings it's in Kersal. And I met this soldier in there who'd just come out, well, he'd been out a while, and he'd done 7 years in the army, and just coming out of prison after doing 17 years. I thought, what are you doing, murder somebody? And he didn't. I mean, he told me the story, and I don't want to bring it up here, what happened and everything. But it's things like this. If we can't help them, well, God help us.
Thank you, Councillor Warner. Could I ask the City Mayor wish to speak?
Yeah, no, I welcome the motion. Obviously, that's been brought before us from Councillor Ord and Councillor Morris, but I also echo and welcome what Councillor Warner has said. I had the absolute honour of meeting the Salford Armed Forces Veterans Network very recently, and some of the cases that they shared with me were absolutely devastating and harrowing. How veterans can be left in destitution within our city and within Greater Manchester without any support, relying on a volunteering network of people who give freely of their time to support them and help them. This is fundamentally wrong. There are significant issues here with this in terms of data protocols between the MOD and local government. And I've agreed with the Veterans Network to look at some of these issues, but I also think we do need a kind of cross-party approach to some of this, and I welcome Councillor Linley's support of the motion. Obviously, my ask is, will you join with me in writing to the MOD and to the government to obviously challenge the system we currently have in place at the moment and the distinct lack of funding we have around supporting our veterans within our communities? Because supporting veterans is probably no surprise to a lot of you. It's not reflected within the revenue support grant calculation. The MOD do not have a direct relationship with us as a local authority and the services within the city to support veterans within our communities. More needs to be done, and I absolutely do agree with Councillor Warner, and I think we need to work with our volunteers, we need to work with the services in the city, but it's not acceptable for people to be sleeping under bushes for 18 months before the system picks them up. This is a disgrace, and I'm really happy that the opposition are looking to support us on this agenda, so thank you.
Thank you, City Mayor. Could I ask Councillor Turner next, please?
I thought I was going to be one of the few that spoke on this, but no, of course we will support this motion. It's very worthwhile, and I thank the two members for actually drawing it up. In my book, it's not to do with this government. No government has really looked after the armed forces of this country, and none of us would be here now if it wasn't for them, and I'm quite happy to petition the government with the City Mayor and anyone else to get them a better deal. I noticed the amendment we signed said they should be treated fairly. Of course they should be treated fairly. In my view, they should be a priority. Anyone that lays their lives on the line is a priority. They've served the country has a duty to look after them, and I, for one, will certainly be voting for this motion, and I don't think anyone else won't be voting for it. So I thank you once again for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Walsh, did I get your name or not? Was it? Sorry. No, right. Councillor Ferguson.
I think it was about 20 years ago that I first became aware of problems of ex-servicemen leaving the forces and coming back into civilian life. It was when I was active in my trade union and that we were supporting the big issue in Manchester. And I was shocked, literally shocked, when I met one of the big issue vendors that was, his pitch was in, up Oxford Road. And when he told me that he'd just come out of the forces and he was sat there selling the big issue. And it wasn't just the fact that he told me he was selling the big issue, but started to tell me about the problems of all those other people who'd left the forces and were in similar situations and having to being homeless and getting into problems of drugs, homelessness, etc. The next time I came aware of it was shortly after I was elected as a councillor, when a mother got in touch with me about her son who was coming towards the end of his term of service and was looking to come back into this city. And he was having difficulty at that time getting onto the housing list, because we were saying that you can't be on the housing list unless you've got a job in Salford or that you live in Salford. And I hope that that situation has now changed. Certainly I think he was helped at that time. The real reason I wanted to stand up today was briefly to say what we're doing as a council in relation to my portfolios at Workforce and Human Relations. Because we have, as you just say, we've passed this, signed this covenant, and it's no use just signing it without doing anything. So I did make a check so that nobody could have a go at me today as what we're doing in relation to servicemen leaving the forces and looking to get a job with the council. And we do give priority to those people if they're leaving the forces and that was their last long-term employer, that they've, within 2 years of having left, and that they're looking for a job, they will be guaranteed an interview with the council as long as the job that they're going for is relevant to their skills and aptitude. But we are, certainly in relation to my portfolio, we're doing things to help ex-servicemen, and I'm sure there's other portfolios are doing similar.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Hines. Councillor Clarkson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just want to stand in support of this motion. I think it goes a long way to addressing a systemic wrong that's been a failing of governments of all stripes. We spend far too much time spending money and attention on what goes on in the services and not what happens afterwards, and there really is an issue with re-entry. I was born at RAF Vegberg and grew up at Rhine-Darlan in JHQ, and I remember coming back to the UK as just an attached civilian, and the change in pace is absolutely unimaginable for men and women who serve to go from such a structured environment to be cast effectively without support into the real world is sometimes a daunting and terrifying experience. If you don't have the support you need, if you don't have the advice, if you don't have the training, you can basically be left in the wind. I actually remember an anecdote from when I took my own Admiralty interview board, being taken aside by a CPO who had come out and gone back in, and he actually said, just don't do it. And that's an absolutely sad state of affairs, that people feel now that it isn't worth serving their country, that it's too much of a liability. I think Councillor Morris actually touched on something very important. The way the US services treat their veterans is night and day. My stepfather's cousin served in Vietnam, and when he got home, he went to university, and he ended up in a top aerospace job. My cousin is going to be coming... Sorry? My cousin is...
Actually warrants interruption, Councillor King.
Thank you. My cousin will be coming out shortly, and whilst they are offering some training, the comparison between what his uncle and what he gets after serving his country is absolutely appalling, quite frankly. I will wholeheartedly support this motion, and if there is anything we can do as an opposition to join with this council, which signed the military covenant early and did its part, then absolutely, we will do
that. Can I just remind everybody, can we try and treat everybody with respect? This is a serious serious debate that we're having today, a serious motion, and I, for one, will not tolerate any interruptions. Councillor Balkine.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is something that's very close to my heart and very much something that I do support. Some of you may well be aware that I have been involved in particular cases, and one of the problems that we actually have are veterans that have in fact unfortunately ended up in jail. There are now something like, I believe, 1,600 veterans that are under a sentence of what we call imprisonment for personal protection. And this is a sentence that they've served, but then due to the parole board, it's up to the parole board to make a decision whether they should be allowed out of jail. One of the major problems that's arisen here is a lot of these soldiers were given, and are still given, a drug called Lariam. And I would ask everyone to actually look on the internet regarding Lariam. It's a drug that protects against malaria, but it's got major side effects, and it's caused things like hallucination, and it causes terrible mental stress when a soldier comes out of jail. Basically, a lot of these soldiers are now have been treated, but are actually living in jail with no foreseeable chance of release. The government is well aware that they've done away with imprisonment for personal protection, and the recent head of the parole board has said that this has to be speeded up, but the government isn't actually doing anything about it. Within our own council, that's Salford City Council, there are people, and I've got to say this, and I will be discussing it with the Mayor at some future date, that have been treated, I can only put it, with disrespect and without help that they actually deserve. If I could actually go on to, there is in fact a councillor, and we talked of shell shock. Councillor Watkin has written a book, and I would suggest that everyone actually reads the book. It's actually going to go on a UK tour with discussion about people that are suffering from mental health as a result of coming out of the army. And I would, being as close as I am to this, I would possibly suggest that we should ask somebody like Councillor Watkin to probably try and organise for a presentation of this play, so it can actually understand what soldiers have had to actually go through since leaving the army. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Balkine. Councillor Compton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A lot has been said this morning, and I agree with everything. I certainly concur with Councillor Clarkson that we will do anything we can to support it. I'm one of the few, like Councillor Warner up there, who served in the services, and I'm over 65. And all I can say is, but for the grace of God. I remember the days when young national servicemen were sent to Christmas Island, and the terrible things that they came back with were unknown at the time, and later life it came and hit home. Anything I can do to support it, I will do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Compton. Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a very quick point. I support the motion very much indeed, and I do recall as a high school girl going to visit Broughton House, which is near where I live, and seeing all the old soldiers and hearing their stories. And finally, I do think it's somewhat ironic that every November we stand there and we say, lest we forget. And yet it does appear that we have forgotten many of these brave people. And I think the very least we can do is address this by asking the correct questions in the census so these people can be identified and helped. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Collinson, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was just a quick point, really. I fully support this motion, but in addition to the support, I really feel very strongly that the government does need to invest more, especially in mental health and war veterans. These people are trained. They're trained to kill. They're not untrained to kill. And as a result, many of them are discharged or come home with serious mental health issues. Money needs to be invested both in the armed forces to do some de-escalation before they leave the armed forces, and in addition when they get home, because what they see and what they hear and what they do whenever they're serving, many of us just can't even begin to imagine. So I think a strong emphasis needs to be on the support that they get from the mental health services whenever they're discharged. Thank you.
Councillor Garrido.
Thank you, Mayor. Just very briefly, I think one of the issues, and it was touched on by one of the members, is the data control. And I think, all the data is there, one assumes it is, with the various sections of the armed services. And if that could be released directly to the local authorities, then we do have the services here to actually cope with that. So I think we really need to be pushing for that data to actually be released from the armed services to local authorities across the country, so that at least we can then make contact with our ex-soldiers. Needless to say, I totally support this motion.
Before I close the debate, does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Ward, would you like to sum up?
I'd just like to thank all members for the contribution, very valuable comments, especially Councillor Collinson's final comment. De-escalation, mental health training is very, very important. In my former job, I probably worked with over 100 veterans of many wars, many from the Falkland Islands, very damaged by their experiences. But more importantly, I'd like to thank the City Mayor for the promise of further action. It's more than emotion, it's more than words, and we need to match it with government spending. I'd just like to thank everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Can we now move to the vote on the motion? Can I ask all those in favour to please show? Is there any against? The motion is carried unanimously. I think we've had a good debate. We've had 13 speakers, so can I thank you all very much. Thank you very much. I'm now going to ask the City Mayor. The City Mayor did come in and see me to say that he has got quite a bit to say, so I've allowed him extra time. So, no. We hopefully will be going for a break at 11 o'clock, but you don't have half an hour, City Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Councillors and colleagues, I'd first like to thank you all for all your support and hard work over the past 4 months. As many of you know, these have been difficult times for myself personally at the loss of my father, so thank you very much. It's been exciting and it's been challenging since council and the mayoral elections back in May, but as a city we have a lot to be proud of. I set out as your city mayor to continue to fight for a fairer and better Salford, at the same time as arguing and fighting our corner with government. This is what I will continue to do. I think we should be proud of our young people within the city, many of whom recently celebrated exam successes with a 4% rise in pass rates and 52% of students achieving A to C grades, including maths and English. We should also be proud of our residents. I've maintained contact with many of our city's residents over the past few months, which are achieving incredible things. The people of Salford in my opinion, are teeming with creativity and ideas for a better and fairer future for us all. All of this activity builds on the work that has been done by our community committees across the city, which over the last financial year have reached out and supported 67,000 people over a range of community projects. This is a great achievement and something we should be proud of. We've taken hard choices and we'll continue to do so. And obviously this is made increasingly more difficult as a consequence of government austerity. I believe it's because our communities really matter, both to me and to hopefully all of us in this chamber and the partners of this city, that we are going to celebrate the real heroes of Salford through an annual Spirit of Salford Awards initiative. I've also maintained my commitment to have direct contact with residents. My first Meet the Mayor session was held at Swinton Gateway at the beginning of September, where I met directly with residents and took on board their concerns, whilst working with them to try and find solutions to their issues. I've always been a community politician at heart, and it's incredibly important to me that the public maintain direct contact with their elected representatives, and also vice versa, that we maintain contact with them. And last but not least, as part of the support given to our communities, we should also be proud of our officers and staff who have continued to work so hard to keep our city functioning day in, day out in these exceptionally difficult times. There are many changes ahead for Salford. Theresa May is now the Prime Minister and has already unleashed a raft of reactionary proposals, from the reintroduction of grammar schools, the abolition of the Department for Energy and Climate Change, and moves to remove us from the European Convention on Human Rights. Indeed, the discussion on reintroducing selection into our education system epitomises, in my opinion, the government's attitude towards society. This is an unfair system which benefits early developers and those with enough money to afford private tuition. Perversely, this has been sold to us as an increase in choice. If most parents truly had free choice, they would choose for their local schools to perform at the highest standard wherever they lived in the country. The change in leadership of the Tory party does not look like it will give us any real change in policy direction within local government. Our budgets will continue to be tight as we scramble over every last penny to keep vital services afloat. We expect a spending reduction of around 14 million in the next financial year, another 12 million after that, followed by another 14 million again the following year. For this reason, our budget consultation process is of top priority in my agenda. This year we plan to engage the public on a much broader scale to let them know how their money is being spent within the city and the financial strains we face as a local authority as a consequence of government's austerity. We will have an online engagement form and a budget calculator as we've done in previous years, but in this budget we also plan to expand participation, working with partner organisations and our staff to maximise the uptake. We're also in the process of developing a needs budget for the city for publication alongside the official budget. As budgets are being squeezed, everyone who works in local government knows that we are not being given enough resources to provide the services and to support and protect our residents in this city. As more and more people fall into food and fuel poverty, personal debt and homelessness, it's clear that the Tory model for the UK is failing us all badly. The cruelty of austerity hits our most vulnerable residents hardest, and it exacerbates poverty within our city. We need to make a stand against further cuts to local government budgets and the cruel logic of Cameron's and May's heartless attacks on the poor. We've also embarked on the creation of a cultural strategy for Salford. This is a plan to strategically join together the cultural offer put forward by our city, from Cow Lane to Salford Quays, Kemsing Walk to the RHS Garden, to the new cafes, restaurants and shops in Chapel Street, and to our many towns centres across the city. We need to look to Salford's heritage as a working class industrial city, as well as looking to the future to create a sense of place, purpose and identity. The cultural learning offer continues to move at a pace in the city with the new 55 million Adelphi Arts Centre, which is opening its doors soon. I'm especially looking forward to the new public realm associated with the Arts Centre, which I understand is going to house a 5-metre high sculpture, I think we could call this, of Frederick Engels' beard. You know, the reason why I'm looking forward to that is because I sport a beard myself, I guess. Since the last council met, we've also seen planning permission granted for the next phase of Media City, in which we will see it double in size. Up to 10 new buildings with development value of more than £1 billion are to be built, creating over 1,400 new homes and hundreds of jobs within our city. This will also include prime office space, live and work units, small business space, creative studios, and a new market square and events hall, cafes, restaurants and shops along existing good public transport links to the site. The potential for jobs here is quite significant. In August, we also saw leading international law firm Freshfields exchange contracts on One New Bailey for 80,000 square feet of office space, and that was shortly after a restaurant was opened on the ground floor of One New Bailey. We are rapidly growing as a city, with tens of thousands of new homes already planned for development over the next 20 years. Our skyline in Lower Broughton, Ordsall and Langworthy is changing. Soon we will have many more residents contributing to our local economy and becoming part of the fabric of our city. And we need to make sure that there are new family homes built and designed for children and for older people, not simply the high-rise living that we seem to be seeing at the moment. We need to make sure that the new development includes affordable homes. We want to do all we can to support young people into affordable homes, be that to rent or to buy. It's about homes for all, and it's about taking the housing crisis issue seriously as a local authority and looking for innovative ways to address that. Since the end of the last Labour government, the social housing build programme has fallen by 70%. Last year, fewer than 10,000 new homes on a social rent were introduced to our housing market nationally. This is not a policy that makes sense, and it is in need of desperate and radical reform. Homelessness is skyrocketing across the country, and millions are struggling with increasingly unaffordable rents. We're in a unique position, I believe, in Greater Manchester, on the eve of devolution, and as a city region, we'll soon have planning and building powers which give us more freedom than we've had previously. A £300 million housing fund has been included as part of the devolution agreement, and I want to see that fund being used to tackle the poor conditions faced by our city's most vulnerable residents. Salford will do everything in its power to see more social housing provision across Greater Manchester over the next few years. I also welcome Andy Burnham MP's recent comments as Labour's Greater Manchester mayoral candidate to lobby government over the £300 million housing fund, with the view that this can be used to help support council, social and affordable housing. We must use this opportunity and our own ingenuity to help tackle the housing crisis, as this government just don't seem to know what they're doing. Or I guess you could ask yourself, do they know what they're doing? The plan for new housing developments will be incorporated, as many of us know, within the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, and Salford's contribution to housing need will be negotiated along with the combined authority need. In these discussions, I've taken an active role to ensure the preservation of green spaces in our city, including the Worsley Greenway. I've written to Richard Farnell to request assurances that key areas of natural beauty and biological importance are protected in future plans. But all this growth will need new investment in planning and infrastructure. Salford's streets are congested, and we desperately need to increase transport capacity. That's why Salford Council will be preparing its local plan, detailing the needs of future growth. We need a better integrated public transport infrastructure. And I believe without fast action, the misery of the daily commute through Salford will continue to blight our residents. At the heart of all of our activities, as a Labour Council, we are dedicated to ensuring that we protect the most vulnerable people within our society. We've already heard an awful lot about veterans this morning. In the context of austerity, this is no easy challenge, but we are determined to make sure that everything possible is done to ensure that the poor are not victimised for the economic mismanagement of the Tory party. Poverty, which when we once thought was relegated to a distant past, is cropping up again within Salford. Malnutrition, hunger, fuel poverty, homelessness. Only yesterday I was contacted by Salford Central Food Bank reporting that their stocks of food were the lowest they've ever had, and within 2 weeks they will not be able to issue food to people in desperate need. This means focusing, as far as I'm concerned, on the direct bread and butter issues that we face within our city: food poverty, fuel poverty, benefit support and financial support. And as an integral part of this process, we are looking into poverty-proofing the functions of the City Council to make sure that they are accessible to everybody, regardless of their economic circumstances. But it also means thinking about the big picture ideas. How do we transform society for the better? How do we stop poverty rearing its head to begin with? And part of the answer is a strategic approach to job creation. Attracting the right kind of employers to the city, employers who bring in local people, train them properly and pay them fairly. We have also had great success in attracting large companies to Salford Quays, but with the advent of Port Salford, we are also looking to attract a whole host of large-scale new employers into the city. We're in the preliminary stages of working with the university to form a joint offer to new digital industries, manufacturing and engineering companies, making Salford a hive of industry once again. But we also need an eye on the national stage, and part of our anti-poverty strategy is an outward-facing campaign to raise awareness of the impacts of poverty on people's lives and its relation to crime, health, employment and general well-being. And building on the work of our report into benefit sanctions and conditionality, we are looking to work with the university to commission further studies into living conditions in Salford and Greater Manchester to raise further awareness of these issues. Last but not least, I would like to turn to the government's policy on academisation and the impact on schools in Salford. Thankfully, David Cameron's regime was forced to U-turn on the forced academisation after stern opposition in Parliament. However, with its new coasting school category, the government have effectively created a quota for forced academisation on a smaller scale. Under new legislation, coasting schools will be defined as schools which fail to achieve the median score in reading, writing and maths by the end of Key Stage 2. This new measure takes no account of the progress gained by pupils from earlier levels, the socio-economic or the educational backgrounds of the intake, and it guarantees a set proportion of schools classed as failing every year, regardless of outcome. These schools will subsequently be academised. And in response to the heavy-handed policies from the Tories, we have to adapt creatively to encourage the best possible outcomes for the children in this city. This was one of the reasons why we established the Academies Trust under John Merry's leadership as the previous lead member for Children's Services. And in all of these areas of work, Salford will be leading the charge, extending our work elsewhere within Greater Manchester. We will be at the forefront of best practice innovation, moving forward for a better, fairer and brighter future for the people of our city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, City Mayor. Now there are general questions or comments to the City Mayor. Any questions or comments? Yes. No, I'm just asking if there's... Sorry, Councillor Greedo, I'm just asking who wants to ask questions and then comments. Questions or comments? Warmisham. Councillor Lindley.
Lindley and Greedo want to make comments.
Right, comments. Greedo. Anybody else? Councillor
Merry, comment.
Councillor Merry. Comments. And Councillor Balkan.
Councillor Mary's got a comment.
Right, I've got comments from Councillor Lindley, Garrido, Merry and Balkine, and I've got questions from Councillor Turner. It's just a comment? Right, so that's a comment. Councillor Warmisham, are you comments or questions? Question, thank you. And you're both, right. Councillor Lindley has a question. Right, so can we do questions first? Councillor Warnisham.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on a comment that the City Mayor made there on the changing face of Salford and the skyline of Salford. I think many of you have seen, as you now drive in to Salford from Manchester, the changing face of Langworthy around the precincts area. The work that Pendleton Together and Salix Homes are doing to change the face of the tower blocks, all looking absolutely fantastic.
Can I just say, is this a question? Because I was going to say you could comment afterwards.
And as I've said, that the skyline is changing, but the one thing that isn't changing, that is a blight on this city for us all, as you come into this great city, is Briar Hill Court. One looks at Briar Hill Court that is over Salford Shopping City, and it is an absolute disgrace. As the ward councillors, when the City Mayor was a ward councillor, was in Langworthy, we contacted Praxis and Sterling Properties that own this tower block. No response.
Can I just ask, I'm sorry to interrupt you, what is the question?
Can I thank Councillor Warmisham for his question, but can I also let Councillor Warmisham know I've actually already acted on this. I have been in dialogue with Councillor Longshaw. As you know, I was a Langworthy ward councillor, and I wholeheartedly support what you've said there in terms of Briar Hill Court and it being a blight on, you know, what is a fantastic ward within the city, in the heart of our city. We've previously tried to engage Sterling Property. And I understand from speaking with officers of this council that has happened on several occasions. What I've asked officers to do now is to explore with government and the HCA what pressure we can actually put on the actual owners of Briar Hill Court to bring that block up to decency. I think it is absolutely an eyesore and it is a blot on Salford's landscape, but also Langworthy's landscape. So just to reassure you, Councillor Woolmersham, we are on with that. And as soon as I have any update, I will certainly update ward councillors. Thank you.
Councillor Lindley, question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to take issue with some of the comments that the City Mayor made about affordable housing, because we've seen across the city affordable housing built with grants provided by Conservative-led governments in Little Hulton, in Walkden, in Eccles, in Central Salford and across the city. So this is my question. Can the City Mayor tell Council what affordable housing schemes were delivered in Salford under the previous Labour administration with a Labour-run council?
Thanks for that very detailed question. Obviously, I don't have the answer to hand on that technical question, but more than happy to provide you with the information. I think the bottom line on affordable housing and social housing is, we're currently undersupplying in terms of need in the city to the tune of nearly 800 homes per annum. And through the government's national planning policy framework, which seems to be the main driver for housing development within Salford and Greater Manchester, it seems that developers are not interested. And why aren't they interested? They're not interested because the government allows them to make between 15% and 20% profit before they even need to consider the issue of affordable housing. We need a fundamental policy change here. We need the HCA to start putting more money into social housing and potentially council housing building. But failing that, this local authority is going to look at potential ways to do it itself, because the government clearly have no interest in this agenda. Happy to provide you with the technical response to your question later.
Councillor Balkine, you've got a question.
With your permission, Madam Mayor, I'll ask a question and reserve the right to comment afterwards. Okay. We heard the announcement, I think it was last week, from the new Prime Minister of why I consider going back to the 60s and 70s on grammar schools. Can I have the City Mayor's assurance that we have no intention of ever allowing grammar schools to come back to this city?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Balkind. I was asked a very similar question, actually, when I met with chairs and vice-chairs of school governing bodies recently. And my answer was the answer that we've given previously around academies. And for me, grammar schools are no different as far as I'm concerned. I would not like to see grammar schools within Salford. What our focus should be on is improving the educational standards of every single school within Salford. Selective education is not a way forward. Selective education, as far as I'm concerned, provides opportunities for the well-off in society. It doesn't deal with some of the socio-economic issues that we face within this city. Our policy, as far as I'm concerned, is fairly clear, and it will apply to grammar schools. We're against forced academies. We will work with schools that locally decide to choose to academise. But on grammar schools, I have to say, we oppose them at any cost within this city.
Thank you, City Mayor. Now we go to comments. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've listened to the City Mayor's speech, which I think he would be well served in taking that to Liverpool next week with him and preach to the converted. I think it would probably go down very well. You may even get a standing ovation. There were positives, but it wasn't long before it was in the negative. The positives are Media City. It's great, and we acknowledge that. That's a great thing. Port Salford, another great thing for this council. And yesterday, some of us went to Harrogate to see the RHS, at the invitation of the RHS, And whoever organised that, I would like to today thank for their organisation. It was second to none. All that went there had a really good day, and it is going to be really exciting when we come to Bridgewater, because it's 3 times bigger than where we were yesterday, and the actual ambition there is huge. But when it's complete, and I'm not sure if I'll still be here, even on this earth, it will be fantastic. It will be a great thing for generations to come, and I'm really pleased about that. And I really wish you'd stuck a bit more on the positives, because, quite frankly, it seems to me, and I'm not sure if I'm correct in assuming this, that you didn't like Mr Cameron, did you? And now you don't like Mrs May. Right, we don't like her. Right. Now, all governments, they need a really good opposition to keep them on their heels. They need someone like you, Mr Mayor. But you see, unfortunately, and this is serious, there is no opposition. That is the worrying thing for this country. You and your comrades will meet next week, and it will probably be highly entertaining for most of the nation. But this is the last week of the leadership, the Labour leadership contest. And we've seen candidates calling each other lunatics, cataclysmic failures, and we've seen Labour MPs denounced for their abuse of Jeremy Corbyn. The party continues to be dominated by its own divisions. That's not an opposition. That's nothing that you can go to the country if you want to govern. You will never govern. You cannot build an economy that works for everyone, like you're saying or intimating, because you want to spend, borrow and tax even more than you did last time. They cannot deliver a society that works for everyone, because you want to hold people back instead of helping them get on. You cannot make Brexit work because you do not believe that Britain can thrive outside of the EU. Well, I do. And they cannot be trusted to keep our country safe because you oppose renewing Trident and you elected a leader who wants to dismantle the armed forces. You're not a credible alternative, and it's a shame you're not. But I'll tell you what you did do when you were in government. Just 3 things you did. The number of unemployed people increased by 1 million in Labour's last term in office. The number of people on unemployment benefit rose by 82%. 82%. The number of households where no member had ever worked nearly doubled under the last Labour government. Now, you go to the nation and you see what happens. I think it's a real crying shame that we've got this going on. There isn't an opposition, and there needs to be for good democracy. And I'm afraid that I can't see the day, as the well-respected Neil Kinnock said, that you'll ever get in government. But actually, what you said today was, to me, a lot of ideology. Thank you.
I was at the end. Can you just make notes and at the end come back on all the comments? Sorry, there are other speakers, Councillor Murray. Can we now call Councillor Garrido?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to congratulate and thank the City Mayor for the press statement he made, I think yesterday or the day before, and that was in relation to his demands that the city's valuable green spaces are protected. And certainly, as a Boothstown and Ellenbrook councillor, that is certainly to be welcomed. And can I just add, in fact, that within that press statement, it said that you, City Mayor, will be seeking assurances that green space in the city will not be touched by new housing proposals. Well, can I remind you that you do have a veto? You know, you can veto any proposals that are put forward, for the Greater Manchester Spatial Strategy. You can veto them, you can stop building on green spaces, and I hope that from the press release that you've made, that is exactly what you will do. However, can I say this is too late for the people of Boothstown and Ellenbrook, particularly for the people of Boothstown. Only 2 weeks ago, on the 1st of September, just over 2 weeks ago, we saw another 132 houses approved by this Labour majority of the planning panel of this council. So much for this council protecting our green spaces. We saw residents' evidence ignored by this council when they put forward evidence that actually said there were not sufficient doctors in the area, there were not sufficient school places in the area, that the transport infrastructure was non-existent, and that we would not be doing any favours, in fact, to people that wanted lower value houses. You spoke, Mr Mayor, at length a few minutes ago about the need for more social housing. Well, approving nearly 200 houses in the last 12 months on greenfields in Boothstown at prices from £350,000 to over £500,000 is not going to provide the social housing that you talked about. So building on green spaces is not going to solve that problem, and we do have to look at alternative ways of actually solving those problems. So I welcome the stance that you're taking on green spaces. I'm disappointed, and so are the people of Boothstown, in the actions that this council has taken in the last 2 weeks, and I do watch with interest the way that you deal with any proposals that are put forward by Greater Manchester. And can I just move very briefly on to the education side? And you did speak at some length about the selection process and what's being suggested now by Theresa May. I'm not going to make any particular comment about grammar schools, but what I'm going to say, in fact, is that we did have a perfectly good education system in this country before the Labour government, back in the 60s, 70s, I think it was the 60s, back in the 60s, destroyed the education system we had in this country. They destroyed our secondary modern schools, which provided good education to large numbers of people. We had the opportunity for young people to take O and A levels in secondary modern schools. I certainly went to one, and I never felt disadvantaged by going to a secondary modern school. So I do think, in fact, that you speak, in fact, from a basis of belonging to a party that, in my opinion, destroyed our schools. Can I just go back briefly and to end on housing? I went to a planning briefing, I think it was last week, and one of the developments on the borders of Salford and Manchester, and I asked a question there about how many low-rise, I'm finishing now, how many low-rise houses were actually being built for local people. And the answer I got, in fact, was, by this particular developer, less than 7%. That's not doing this council or this city any good. And it's this sort of thing that we need to be looking at. We need to be talking to developers, and we need to be saying that 7% of low-rise houses suitable for families and at a cost that they can afford either to rent or buy must be built in to the master plan of this city.
Thank you, Councillor Garrido. Councillor Murray.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate the City Mayor, not only on what I thought was a very good speech, but also in terms of what he's been doing in respect of flood victims in the Lower Broughton area. I think the letter that both him and Councillor Antibus have sent out, drawing attention to the reports that have been published, very comprehensive reports, and drawing the attention of homeowners in particular to the money available for flood resilience moves was excellent. I think the reports, and I'd like to congratulate Councillor Antrobus on being heavily involved in these reports, are good reports in describing, first of all, what happened, and in terms of outlining the possibility of an action plan that could solve the problem. And you can rest assured that the Broughton councillors will be holding both Councillor Antrobus, the City Council, and the Environment Agency to account in terms of delivering an action plan that minimises flood risk in the future and, above all else, ensures effective methods of communication to the ordinary people in that area in terms of likely flood warnings. But, Ceremonial Mayor, I actually followed your recommendation that you gave to the City Mayor of making notes while Councillor Turner was speaking. And I think I've got a very clear note of what the basic thrust of what he was trying to say. And the basic thrust of what the leader of the Conservative group was saying is, yeah, we know we're not very good as a government, but the other lot are far worse than us. We know we've got nothing positive to say about the government, so we'll concentrate on attacking the opposition. An opposition, I believe, and I do believe Jeremy Corbyn will win the election, and I believe it will be an effective opposition, showing a clear alternative to the policies that your government is pursuing. And before we talk about the dangerous radicalism of the Labour Party in opposing grammar schools, shall we just go through a few of the other people who are dangerous socialists in that respect? Nicky Morgan, who you thought was a wonderful education secretary, has now made it very clear that she's opposed to the reintroduction of grammar schools. Even Michael Gove has expressed profound doubts about the possibility of it happening. David Cameron has chosen to resign from the House of Commons rather than to be forced to support a policy that he knows is absolutely wrong. And then he says, we were opposed to Brexit. God, what a selective memory they have on the benches opposite. You know, do you remember somebody called David Cameron? Do you remember somebody called George Osborne? I know you now think that, again, they were dangerous socialists, but they were actually members of your party and in positions of responsibility. I want to make it clear why I think the fight against grammar schools is one of the most important fights that we as an opposition party, with the support of many Tories, are going to have. And I have a plea to those people opposite who know that grammar schools are a step backwards. Speak out about it, because it's really incredibly important to the fabric of this country. You have the nerve, your leaders have the nerve to say, we want to select a few people and give them opportunity, but the others will be no worse off. Some of us who actually apply logic to that discussion, something you might have benefited from in a grammar school education, Councillor Garrido, right, would have thought, well, hang on a minute, if you're going to select people, why are you selecting them if it's not to give them something better than what is available to the rest of the people? Otherwise, what is the point of selection? And even independent school head teachers have said, we're rubbing our hands. Think of all these rich people whose children may not get into grammar schools, who will know that the actual alternative is incredibly inferior, so they're going to pay fees, they're going to want to go to independent schools. We're going to make lots of money out of this because they'll want to go to independent schools in order to avoid the consequences of the policies the Tories have introduced. I just want to plead with people, think about the person who has the ambition to go to university or to have to be a high flyer in terms of opportunity, who gets denied that at the
Councillor Murray, 1 minute to go. OK, everybody. Can I just say that there are 6 others. That's Councillor Lindley, Councillor Bolkine, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Hines, Councillor Wheeler and Councillor Jones. And I intend now to break for 10 minutes, and those people will speak after the break. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor King said at the break I'd been quiet so far, so he might want to apologise to the rest of the Labour members for tempting fate. I asked the City Mayor a question before about affordable housing. I look forward to the answer. He's going to be looking a while because hardly any new build affordable housing was delivered under the previous Labour administration and with a Labour council as well, which was part of the reason why I asked the question. And it just shows actually that we're not going to take any lessons from the City Mayor about affordable housing when hundreds of new homes in Little Hulton and Walkden and Eccles and Salford have been delivered for affordable rent under a Conservative-led government. But I'm surprised, Madam Chair, that the City Mayor said, I need this extra time, I've got a lot to say, because 90% of his speech could have been delivered by the previous City Mayor at any point during the last 4 years. It's the same rhetoric, the same issues, the same tone, and it's that tone that has led the Labour Party down the drain nationally, because it is that sneering tone that has led to the election of Jeremy Corbyn as a leader of the party. And until the Labour Party realises that, they're going to keep losing, and we are going to keep having Conservative governments, and that is fine by me. But the City Mayor can't have it both ways. He can't say how terrible things are and how brilliant things are at the same time, which is what he tried to do in his speech. Because we know that unemployment is down massively in Salford since the Conservative government took office. We know that employment is up. The City Mayor talked about transport links. We know that electrification is being delivered under a Conservative-led government. We know...
Excuse me, Councillor Jones, you came in late, and I did say that I didn't want any interruptions. Thank you.
Whatever discussion we can have about the busway, and we do know that since the busway has started, that more community routes have been cut. The number 35 has been cut, leaving Reapland Row Green without buses. The 37 bus has been curtailed, and all stuff that we were told would not happen. All the things we were told would not happen to bus routes prior to the busway are starting to happen. Bus routes cut. If you want to get a bus in Walkden, you've got the busway and you've got the top road. If you live anywhere else, your bus is under threat if it's not gone already. But the City Mayor talked about the economy. We know that unemployment is down in Salford. We know that employment is up. We know that investment is up because the City Mayor talked about some of the big firms that have come thanks to the strong economy that's been delivered by the government. And what do the opposition do? The City Mayor loves talking about the Prime Minister and the previous Prime Minister. Well, who's in charge of the Labour Party's economic policy? It's John McDonnell. And what did we find out last week? When the recession hit, when thousands of people in Salford lost their jobs, when firms want pop, when local businesses foundered, what did the Shadow Chancellor say to people in Salford and across the country? He said, I've been waiting for this for a generation. That's what he said. I've been waiting for this for a generation.
Councillor Lynn, you've got 1 minute.
I've been waiting for this for a generation. And the City Mayor stands up and lectures the Conservative government on economic policy, a Conservative government that has delivered economic growth, more jobs, lower unemployment, higher wages, and this is the opposition that we have at the moment. A Shadow Chancellor who welcomed a recession, a Shadow Chancellor who thought that the recession was the best thing to happen, and that is the choice that people are going to have when the next general election comes. And it's all very well the City Mayor standing up and saying that he doesn't like what the Conservatives are doing, and he is entitled to do that. We're a democracy, this is a council chamber. But if he does that, when that's his alternative, when that's his party's alternative, he's going to find himself with more of the same. Thank you, Madam Chair.
There are a number of people who are now putting their hands up. I did ask before we had the break whether anybody else wanted to speak, and nobody put their hands up. I know you probably had a thought about it while you were outside, but I would have liked to have seen your hands before. We've got 20 minutes for these questions and comments, and I'm nearly at the end of that 20 minutes, and the City Mayor needs to reply. So I'm going to call the people that I actually said before we went for our break, and I'm sorry if I upset everybody else that wants to now speak. Perhaps they could do it under somebody else's, one of the other lead members. Thank you. Now, can I call Councillor Bolkine?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When I was thinking of making this comment, I was thinking 40 years ago I sat my 11 plus, but suddenly when I was working out my years, I realised it's 52 years ago, so it's amazing how time flies. I sat my 11 plus in the early 60s, and I failed. I didn't fail fully because there was a thing called a technical grammar school, and I passed the maths sides of the 11 plus, but I failed the English side. So I was still seen as a failure by a lot of my friends who ended up at places like North Manchester Grammar School and Salford Grammar School, and I ended up going to Ducie Tech, and from Crumpsall right across town with a bus pass. Now there's a thing, bus passes. Isn't it a shame that no children have a bus pass today? And I failed. And then maybe 3 years later, comprehensive schools came in, and Ducie, instead of becoming Ducie Technical Grammar School, became Ducie High School. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because when you went to a technical grammar school, teachers basically concentrated on the sciences and maths and left you behind when it came to languages and English. And my English at the time was not very good. And an English teacher came along and he spoke to my parents along with a lot of other parents and said, I'm going to give extra time to these children because I know they're bright enough to understand English. And that was the opportunity that I look back on, which would never ever be given to me today if I failed my 11 plus. Believe it or not, it was only 9 years ago that I sat my last exam, because we were encouraged at Ducie High School, and I would say that Howard Bernstein was a year below me, not that that's any great record to speak about, but it just shows you how a comprehensive school can help someone. I feel that it was the secondary education I got, not the technical grammar school education that I got, that helped me progress in life. And if anything else about comprehensive schools, it drags people up. It doesn't drag people down. And what we want is to encourage children, even if they come into a comprehensive school with not the learning that they feel they should get, but give them the opportunity to have that learning and the opportunity to go to grammar school, that's what, to university. That's what we should be offering the children of Salford. And I hope that the Mayor will reiterate and possibly ask the Assistant Mayor to make comment on grammar schools again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolkine. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you. Try it that way. As a member of the Labour Party, I get worried sometimes when members of the opposition are trying to give me advice on who I should vote for in the Labour leadership election. Because what is their motive? You know, certainly I will not be taking your advice, and I'm sure that the vast majority of Labour Party members will not be taking your advice either, and I look forward to Jeremy Corbyn being announced as the leadership election on Saturday, and I look forward to those members of Parliament uniting behind him. But before I go off the question of leadership,
once more, no interruptions while... Councillor Atwas, I don't need you to point to tell me who they are. I'm up here and I can see them. Can we not have any more interruptions when members are speaking?
I think you've cut me off as well here. You've cut me. What I was going to say is, on the question of leadership, I would be interested to know who the members of the opposition voted for in their leadership election, because the reality is that they couldn't find anybody to stand. They were falling down like flies at the end of the day, and from the feedback I get talking to some of them, they weren't very happy with the outcome at the end with Theresa May, but I'll leave that aside. I won't go through my education either, because I certainly won't tell you what year I failed my 11 plus either, because you can then do your calculations, can't you? One thing agreeing with Councillor Turner was that it was a very good day yesterday, seeing what the Royal Horticultural Society were doing at Harrogate, and recognising that they were now wanting to come to Salford, and that we can have a similar prize asset within our city. But I don't think it's an accident that the Royal Horticultural Society decided to come to Salford. There are other places in the northwest they could have gone to, but they decided on Salford. Just as the BBC took a decision where they were going to be based, and they similarly decided to locate themselves in Salford. Also, I remember a few years ago, when I first came on the council, that there were continuous criticisms of what was happening on Chapel Street. And I think that anybody who goes down now and starting to see the regeneration and how it's starting to change will recognise that the Labour Council then made a correct decision. Things don't happen immediately, but I think that what we see is correct decisions by a Labour council. And so, going back to the comments from over there, we're told about what a good opposition is. I've got to say from these people, it's a case of the kettle calling the pot black. Because what sort of opposition do we get from the opposition councillors? Criticism, negativity, all the time. I think that we can look... The Mayor gave a very good speech demonstrating how we're a growing city, employment being created, and those people that we want to have employed within the city need homes to live in. There's always the sniping from the other side, we don't want it here, we don't want it there. It was, oh, we don't want it in our wards. But I've never heard anything positive from them, and I look forward one day before I finish on this council, and I'm not saying when that's going to be. I'm planning to be here for a good few years yet, but I look forward to something positive coming from them in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Can I just ask if we could... we only had 20 minutes for this, for the comments and response from the Mayor, and we're now up to about 40 minutes. So in total, you're taking an hour of time. I'm not trying to stop anybody from making comments, but perhaps if we could be a bit sharper on how we're delivering them, it may help. Thank you. Councillor Hines.
I could tell, Madam Mayor, that you thought it, because I was getting up, that you want me to be quicker. I thought so. Well, quite honestly, I thought the Mayor made an excellent speech. Not just the way he made that speech, but the content of it. And the content of it, why it was so good, it was so sincere for what he and what we on this side want to do in the future. Now, the ex-mayor was committed to the future as well, and that's what he was saying at a time when we've got a Conservative government that has been part and parcel of an austerity programme never seen since the Tories, the 30s. Now, Councillor Lindley gets up and talks about the mayor giving all rhetoric, and he talks about employment. Now, this employment now, I would argue that under the Conservative government, we've got employment that is in fact very, very similar to Sports Direct, quite frankly, where people are being employed on conditions that years ago would never have happened when we had a strong trade union movement that would argue for those people. We've got contracts now that people don't know from one day to the next whether they're going to be in work in that week, and all that means. You can catalogue it time and time again. And we talk about David Cameron's legacy. Well, just let me tell you about David Cameron's legacy. Not only did he preside over the biggest debt that this country has ever had, when he was going to reduce that deficit, he talked about with his Chancellor that he was going to cut I'm talking about the deficit rather, the deficit that he was going to extinguish within a parliament that is still there. He talked about balancing the economy away from the City of London. Has that happened? No, it has not. We're talking now about, when we look at some stats about the Tory government, the top 5% of this country, take 40% of the wealth, of the income rather. They have 60% of the wealth, yet the bottom 20% of this country have 8% of the wealth and very little of the 8% of the income and 1% of the wealth. Now, talk about inequalities. We've not seen that in donkey's years. But this is what they rely on, time and time again. And we talk about the Salford. Well, you know, before the Conservatives, even the Thatcher major government, Salford was investing on its own behalf, without the aid of government. We were doing that because we seemed to, we took the old council leader, Les Huff, Ken Edwards, all saw that investment, which we were criticised of through the capital programme, that was going to make the difference. We've carried on doing that. And the opposition over there have criticised us on our capital programmes, on borrowing to preserve, to make sure that we got that capital programme time and time again, that served us well. Councillor Turner, when he...
Councillor Hines, you have 1 minute.
Can I have that 30 seconds back? And the point is, when we talk about a Conservative government, well, I wouldn't trust them to run my bath. And even more, I don't think they could organise a farce in a baked bean factory, quite honestly. So, let's get real. Let's see what's really happening to the people of this city and the people of this country while we're in there, under their domain.
I think my comments fell a bit on stony ground there. I don't think he was listening to me. Councillor Wheeler. No. Sorry. Are you sure? Thank you very much. Councillor Jones. That's not...
I'll be sharp.
Madam Mayor. We must have a debate about bus services, because under the last Labour government, which went on during 3 general elections, there were no large-scale bus cuts anywhere in the United Kingdom. You've only been in government for a short time, and the cuts are everywhere. And if you want, I'll email you with a list of all the cuts in the northwest of England, Lancashire, Cumbria, Cheshire, Merseyside, Greater Manchester, everywhere. Night bus services, everything is disappeared because you are not funding the bus services and the bus operators. And on the guided busway, are you two going to have no discussion? For 15 years in the case of Robin, 10 years in the case of you said misguided busway, didn't you? Nobody'd use it. White elephant. That's what you said. 38,000 a week using it. And we've just ordered 5 more buses, by the way, which is, there's 20 buses, we've ordered another 5 because we can't get all the people on that we want to. But on grammar schools, that's really why I want 3 quick points. I'll be quick, honestly. 3 quick points. I lived in Earlham in the 60s, and our next door neighbour had twins. Guess what? One passed the 11 plus, one failed the 11 plus. Now you can imagine the sensation in the local area, the tears, the upset. It was awful. On GMR, in the last fortnight, there were 4 people talking about the Trafford Grammar School situation. My sister lives in Trafford, by the way, but talking about the grammar school situation. All 4 of them said they paid for tutorage for their, and they had to in order to get them through the 11 plus. And one woman actually said, and we can't afford a holiday this year. And you think, oh my God. And the third issue is, I followed my sister to Urmston Grammar School, and the head teacher had the idea of a debate in the school. This would be around 66 time, when Harold Wilson was pressing through the comprehensive education legislation. And we had this debate, and they asked for volunteers to speak for grammar schools and against them. So you can imagine I was the main. I was 14 years of age. It was a bit of a frightening experience. But the point is, I've never changed my mind. Rich people can have whatever education they can afford. We know that. We've accepted that for too long in this country. And in my opinion, they shouldn't get a penny from the state. As far as I'm concerned, if you want to buy into a school, so be it. But the rest of the schools, all pupils should be given the same opportunity with the same funding. There should be none of this, we'll have an academy, give them more money, we'll have a grammar school, give them more money, and then the rest who go to secondary, modern or wherever, you'll get the lesser education. It's a disgrace, and we should never, ever go back to that system.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Can I now ask the City Mayor to reply as best he can with all his notes?
Yeah, how do I respond to all of that? We'll start with the Brexit question, I think, really. I mean, what's interesting is David Davis, who's responsible for negotiating Brexit on behalf of the government, has actually said recently that staying in the single market was virtually impossible. We've also got Liam Fox, Trade Minister, saying that British business is lazy. And then we've got Boris Johnson. I mean, negotiating Brexit, I mean, by all means have a go at the Labour Party, but come on. I mean, what's going on in the Tory Party is an absolute disgrace. Also, I understand that the government are considering using Crown prerogative to avoid actually having a vote in Parliament on this issue. I mean, this is the party of democracy. It doesn't even want MPs to have a vote on the issue of Brexit. In terms of reasonable opposition, I think the points have been well made by other members of the Council. It's not surprising. I support Jeremy Corbyn. I think Jeremy Corbyn will be a great leader for the Labour Party, and I'm looking forward to his election. And I'm actually looking forward to us getting on with the job of actually forming an opposition and challenging some of the horrific policies coming out of the Tory Party. On the issue of unemployment and jobs, and I think there's been great play made of this by the opposition benches, you know, what they don't engage in here when they talk about unemployment is they just look at the official claimant count. And actually what's going on in the labour market almost passes them by. It's not even of any significance. As long as the unemployment count is down, everything's fantastic. Well, we all know as Labour councillors that that couldn't be further from the truth. You know, 0-hour contracts. We've got businesses engaging in things like asset stripping, running businesses into the ground, people being made redundant as a consequence of this. We've got problems where people want employment, but they can only get a part-time job. The DWP have introduced in-work conditionality, where basically if you're not getting enough hours or you're not getting a decent wage, you're going to be penalised for it. I mean, come on. The problem is with the labour market. And the problem is also with the economy, which, you know, seems to have passed them by. Then we move on to the issue that Councillor Garrido raises around my role within the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. What I would like to draw attention to on this is the fact that the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework is a statutory document. Therefore, it's required by government for us to highlight what our employment sites are within the conurbation and what our housing need is within the conurbation. And obviously this is part and parcel about how we grow the economy, because obviously allocating sites for housing and employment growth is absolutely critical to things like Northern Powerhouse, devolution, and actually creating those opportunities that we want to see for the people of our city. There will be a full and frank public consultation on the document when it's released, as Councillor Garrido knows. But let's not indulge in what we've had in the past, which I refer to as fantasy planning. This idea that somehow we can have a strategy as long as we just do what we want within our little districts and even within our wards and communities. It simply doesn't work like that. That is absolute fantasy. The Greater Manchester Spatial Framework is going to be a very useful document in terms of championing our housing needs and also our economic needs. Also, as I've made great play of, what we need to do is ensure that throughout this process we look to protect our most valuable green spaces within the city. That is the RHS, that is Chatmoss, that is Worsley Greenway. And we need to really look at this idea of creating green suburbs. You know, we just talk about Greenbelt and Greenfield as though it's, you know, some sort of public good. Absolutely, I accept that in some respects, but an awful lot of green space and greenfield is never stepped foot on by members of the public, and I don't think we should lose sight of that. And we also need to do what's right for the whole of the city, and we also do not need to do what's right for the whole of Greater Manchester. The spatial framework isn't just about what goes on in one community, it is actually about the broader economic and housing strategy for our city. Also, what Councillor Garrido failed to highlight in his comments was the recent passing of Highgrove. I mean, I noticed you didn't draw attention to the fact that we've got 20% affordable housing as part of the planning consent that was granted there at Highgrove. So we are trying to the best of our abilities to tackle this issue. Now, moving on to Councillor Linley. In terms of the national housing crisis, just to let you know, David Boffey in The Guardian said, official figures, this is official figures nationally, show that 70% fewer social rented homes where rents are capped came onto the market in 2014 and 2015, so between that year, compared with 5 years earlier when we had a Labour government. 70% less. So that's what's happening nationally. Obviously, what I will get is the figures about what's going on in Salford. Now, Councillor Linley made great play of my speech and how on the one hand I'm criticising government and on the other hand I'm saying everything's great in Salford. I don't see any problem with that. And actually, the reason why that is the case, in my opinion, is because of the foresight of previous Labour leaders of this local authority. The growth we're experiencing in this city to date is as a consequence of decisions taken many, many years ago by members of this council and previous leaders that have gone before. It is not down to the government and the government's economic policy. It's down to the hard work of this local authority. It's also down to the hard work of Greater Manchester to push the narrative of devolution, to push the narrative of Northern Powerhouse, to hold government to account for the disproportionate investment that's going into the City of London when compared with Greater Manchester. You know, there's reports out there that say public capital spend on a per capita basis in the City of London is over £5,000. In the North West as a region, we're looking at less than £1,500. You know, that's the issue here. Why is public sector capital important? It's really important to address the issues within your own communities where you've got lack of infrastructure, roads, public transport, integrated transport. This is the important stuff for the future. So please don't try and say that somehow the government's economic plan is working. The government's economic plan is working thanks to the decisions of this council and thanks for the blooming hard work of Greater Manchester, as far as I'm concerned. I welcome Councillor Balkin's points on grammar schools. I think they were well made, and obviously you know from the speech that I endorse those. Also, thanks to Councillor Ferguson, wholly endorse what you said about the leadership, and thanks for your comments on the speech. Again, Councillor Bill Hines also drew attention to the issue of employment and jobs. I think he's absolutely right. You know, we've got such unscrupulous employers up and down this country that are not interested in paying things like living wage, that are not interested in giving people decent employment rights. We, as the public sector, we as a local authority are trying to change that, as many of you know, by being an exemplar employer, by having our employment standards charter, by trying to change employers' attitudes towards pay. And inequality continues to grow, as Councillor Hines has rightly pointed out. The gap between the rich and the poor continues to get worse, even under a Tory government. Why is this? This is simply because they don't care about people. They don't care about what's really going on in the housing market. They don't really care about what's going on in the education system. They don't really care about what's going on in the labour market. They fundamentally are wedded to this idea that the market will deliver everything. And this laissez-faire attitude has obviously been demonstrated time and time again to fail. But they're still here, defending their line, defending their ideology. In terms of what Councillor Jones says on cuts to bus services, you know, he's better placed than I am to actually comment on that. I absolutely highlight that. I mean, all of this is taking place within a context of austerity and local government cuts, and bus services have been significantly impacted. We've seen the closure of night services. We've seen other services closed as a consequence of that. Totally support Councillor Jones's position on grammar schools and the 11+, and how private tutoring is obviously what allows people to pass the 11+. And that was the point that I made in the speech. You know, we'll end up with an education system here where he who can pay ends up getting the best quality education, which is an absolute disgrace and morally bankrupt as far as I'm concerned. I think that exhausts it, other than... No, that's me done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, City Mayor. We're now going to go on to questions, general questions and comments to the Cabinet members. Can I just say, before you all stick your hand up, can I just say that we started at 9:45, and to stay within your 3 hours, we need to complete by 12:45. It's now just a couple of minutes past 12, so can I just remind you that if we're getting a bit bogged down, we need to remember the times. I'm not the one that set this, but this is the times that's been set. Sorry. Sorry, it was remiss of me to ask, do you wish to go on till 1:45? It's not me saying we should go on till 1:45. Would the council wish to go on till 1:45? Or do you want to finish at 12:30? Sorry, I can't. 12:30? Right, can we go to the vote? All those who want to complete the business by 12:30, please show your hands. We don't have a name vote, do we? And those who were prepared to go on till 1:45. It's 12:30 then, isn't it? Yeah, I'm sorry, it's 12:30. So I will be very strict on that because we have a couple of more after that. We've got bodies joint bodies that we need to deal with. So now we're going on to general questions. There is only one person who's actually written in, and unfortunately that is to Councillor Boschel. So can I ask Councillor Bentham to actually ask her question?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Do you welcome the announcement made by Damien Green, the Work and Pensions Secretary, on the Andrew Marr show that there will be no more cuts to benefits, strongly indicating that the government's austerity agenda is over?
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Bentham. Yes, I would very much welcome any proposal to stop the vicious cuts to our vulnerable people. I was, however, a bit nervous when the new Work and Pensions Secretary indicated that pensioners' benefits might be cut after 2020, when he pledged to tackle intergenerational fairness. I think we'd be right to be very worried for our older people. Our residents have been hit hard with the cuts already made, and there's more in the pipeline. Just one example is the lower benefit cap of 20k for families, due to come into force in November or December this year. This will impact on 440 Salford families directly. And being employed simply doesn't protect families against poverty. Research from the Institute of Fiscal Studies has found that despite a so-called record employment rates, poverty levels haven't shifted in recent years. Being in employment may have helped some to improve their living standards, but slow wage growth, a squeeze on the value of benefits, and years where the cost of essentials rose faster than incomes means that working full-time on national living wage is generally not enough to raise living standards or make that slow climb out of poverty. Then, as the City Mayor referred to, there is poor employment practice, with almost 1 million people now on zero-hour contracts and approximately 1.4 million who are underemployed. That is working part-time and wanting full-time work. And with many forced to become self-employed, subcontractors, in order to get any work, but have no employment rights at all. According to the ONS, about 15% of these working in the UK in 2014 were self-employed, the highest proportion in 4 decades since data started being collected. Councillor Linley raised employment data again. As I have said previously in the Chamber, I do not accept the unemployment statistics. The slow rollout of universal credit has skewed this, and we still have record numbers of sanctions, people who are economically inactive or in the black economy. They don't appear on that data. And we have evidence of people who feel being unemployed has been stigmatised so much by this government that they just won't sign on. Nor are these people recorded in those statistics. On top of this, the cuts that have already happened, is it any wonder that more people than ever are visiting food banks? And you heard the City Mayor previously on the current situation that our food bank in Salford finds itself. Last year, 3,269 three-day emergency food supplies were given to people and 1,410 to children from the Salford Central Food Bank alone. I've talked in previous councils about the impact of cuts to benefits, and like most members here today, I find it heartbreaking and completely unacceptable for one of the world's largest economies that our most vulnerable people and our hard-working families are suffering for the greed and incompetence of bankers. And yet again, the media are reporting on their record bonuses this year. Mark Carney, the Bank of England Governor, has said, and I quote, "Bankers caused the crash and got away with it. They should pay a higher price." He went on to say, despite facing limited social embarrassment, they are still on the best golf courses. They've faced no sanctions, have they? It's far easier to pick on the most vulnerable, and despite Damien Green's promise of no more cuts, there's still plenty in the pipeline. to add to the misery of those who least deserve it, including $12 billion of further cuts to the working age benefit by 2019-20. What I really would welcome from this government, for once, is a real demonstration of compassion and courage to take from those who can most, not least, afford it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bushell. I know there's a number of hands going up, but if you look at the agenda, it's for each of the lead members for each of the on the Cabinet. So I will read their name out. If you've got a question for that particular lead member, you can then ask the question or a comment. Is there any more questions or comments for Councillor Bushell? No? Can I now move on to Councillor Merry, the Deputy City Mayor? Is there any questions or comments for Councillor Merry? No? Thank you. Now, the third one is Councillor Longshaw. He's the lead member for Housing and Neighbourhoods. Are there any questions or comments for Councillor Morris?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My question is about housing associations and rented accommodation. Many young people are trapped at home. They're in employment. My grandson's, for one, is an IT manager in the NHS. Couldn't dream of owning his own home. If he goes to the private sector, he faces a substantial deposit to rent any accommodation. So what are the housing associations doing? Are they being allowed to build more rented accommodation? And what about councils? When will they be allowed to build rented accommodation?
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Councillor Longshaw, could you answer that, please?
Yeah, in terms of housing associations, there has been a change of government policy in terms of what they are building and the restrictions placed upon them. They are having to deal with a national affordable housing programme that focuses on affordable rents, and the affordable classification is rent is 80% of the private rented market. So they're not true social or low-rented homes that are around there. They've also been impacted by the previous Chancellor's reductions in terms of their income. So that's affected some development programmes that the housing associations have had, and they're having to reorganise themselves to deal with all of that one. In terms of the affordable housing programme going forward, the government's investment programme, from 2018 onwards, that is focused on non-social housing for housing associations. There is an expectation that housing associations use their own funding or reserves to build. And in terms of their restrictions that have been placed on them, they are struggling to build new. We're prepared to work with the housing associations to see what we can do. We are working as a city council to do what we can do in terms of new social housing within this city. We're not quite there yet. We're working some policies up, and we hope to be announcing something shortly. So we're trying to tackle the unbalanced housing market that's been caused by an unbalanced housing programme and policy by this current government.
Thank you, Councillor Longshaw. Councillor Lancaster, any comments? Lead Member for Environment and Community Safety. Oh, Councillor Garrido.
I have a question first and then a comment when you get to that, Madam Chair. The question is, in relation to the free weekly bin collections, when will the review be complete and when will we have an answer as to what the decision as to future collection arrangements will be in the city?
Councillor Lancaster.
Now report to Cabinet in October, and that's still the process which we're going through, so it hasn't changed. Can I just briefly mention something separate, if I may? I wanted a resolution of council to thank the staff who worked on Saturday, on the Salford Day, on the lawns outside, because I think they did a fantastic day, which you should be congratulated on.
Hear, hear.
Thank you for that. Councillor Rideau, you've got a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I asked the question, in fact, because it was really asked in view of the considerable number of complaints that have been received by this council. I mean, we're talking of a 10,000 petition, we're talking of many thousands of other people in the west of Salford who in fact are having huge problems with the free weekly bin collections. We're talking about families with bins that are overflowing. We're talking about those people with elderly, those homes with elderly people who have extra disposal needs. And the whole thing, in fact, is becoming, in our opinion, and the opinion of a lot of residents, a health hazard. Many bins, if we're not careful, are going to start to attract vermin. And I believe, in fact, we cannot afford to wait. I'm quite well aware that originally we were looking at October for a decision. I believe we cannot afford to wait then. The people of the west of Salford, the people certainly in my area in Boothstown, Ellenborough, have just about had enough, Madam Chair. They're not prepared to wait any longer. We now need a definitive decision, and that decision must be to cease the free weekly bin collection. Now, I don't want to hear any excuses about the fact, well, you know, this has produced an extra £500,000 of income or an extra £500,000 of savings. The people in these areas pay a considerable amount of council tax. They deserve, for what they pay, to receive the service for which this council is supposed to provide. And this council is not providing that service, regardless of what saving they're making. We want the fortnightly bin collections brought back, and we want the whole method of collecting waste to be investigated, including the way that we recycle. Unfortunately, this council entered into a long-term agreement, which I think was totally misjudged in terms of what we do with our recycling. It's about time, in fact, that we took hold of this properly and we started looking at how we can actually reverse some of the bad decisions that were made in the past.
Thank you, Councillor Rideau. Councillor Lancaster.
Involved in the debate whether it's working or it isn't. What I'm working on is facts, and what we've got is detailed reports of every complaint which has been made. In fact, when Councillor Greedall this week, I think it was, sent an email in with the sort of issues he's raised today, I pointed out to him the pilot is about information which we get from the public. And the public, I asked him to let me know of all the addresses where he's had complaints from the service we've provided. And that's the way we should operate, and that's the way the assessment the council will make on the success is on the feedback we get from the public on the service we delivered. I'm not used, and I deliberately could have used. I circulated to every member of the council a copy of a summary of comparisons which we went to scrutiny committee, which they asked for. And it showed quite, and I'm not going to use it other than one. It showed quite clearly that the residual waste, which is what goes in the black bin, reduced from 11,467 in the same period in 2015 down to 10,336 tonnes of waste. So not on financial grounds, but on waste being taken into the residual waste, there's a considerable reduction in the residual waste which is going there. So I'll make the case when the time is made, but the pilot will be finished at the end of September. The report will go to Cabinet mid-October, including the petition. And I've got to say I've checked, and I don't know if you have, but I've checked with some of the petitions. The majority of the petition was actually done before the actual waste proposals had actually started. There was a signature continued petition which was started at the time we were debating whether to go to this recycling collections or not. So that information will be discussed by the Cabinet at the time, and we'll make a decision, and you will make a decision. And you'll get the full information, which I've always promised this council, of what the public have said and not what Councillor Greedall has said.
Thank you, Councillor Lancaster. Questions and comments to Councillor Antrobus, Lead Member for Planning and Sustainable Development. Councillor Ord. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mullen. Councillor Ord, can Councillor Mullen go first, because he did ask me before. Sorry, Councillor Mullen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the recent heavy rains, unfortunately, we experienced flooding again in Barton. I want to thank Councillor Antibus for getting to the root cause, which it would appear to be a land dispute. I was just wondering if there's anything else that you could do to help the residents of Barton with this particular issue.
Councillor Ord.
I note the difficulties mentioned in Boodstown and Ellenbrook integrating just 200 homes into the local infrastructure, including schools and roads. Can Councillor Antibus explain the challenges in Able, Riverside and Odsall, where another 20,000 homes are due to be built, including some on green open space that's just as valued, but just happens to be brownfield land?
Councillor Antibus.
Well, can I thank Councillor Mullen, and I'd certainly like to pay tribute to the staff in Urban Vision who carried out the flood investigations in the heavy rainfall last week, which was mainly surface water flooding. We will take up the issues around the land disputes, which is delaying a major investment proposal in the area, which would alleviate some of those issues. But there was widespread surface water flooding throughout the city. We weren't hit as badly as other areas, and I think that is in part down to the decision that's been taken by members of this council to support the drainage investment programme, which has seen our drainage system improved and regularly cleaned to ensure that we're able to remedy these issues, and we look to further initiatives to try to mitigate surface water flooding. To Councillor Ord's question, he alludes, of course, to the I think what Councillor Birch said at a recent members' policy day as the glorious problem of growth. I remember when Councillor Garrido used to come to council meetings and point his finger at us and go very red in the face and say, it's all your fault that people are fleeing the city, that they're leaving the city and abandoning it because of Labour. And now that we've got growth, it's thanks to a Conservative government, and we've got this strange situation on the opposition benches where they think that the growth is wonderful, but they oppose every single application which is the consequence of that growth. And I think, Madam Chair, you would have hung your head in shame at the last planning panel where the Conservative councillor on that panel refused to support the extension of Media City, something that you personally fought for and was in line with the original application that you supported and other members of the Conservative group supported. I'm sorry that this anti-growth philosophy seems to have infected the opposition benches, because I tell you that trying to find spaces for growth is a lot better than managing the dereliction and decline that comes from people leaving this city. I'll tell you that now. So, in answer to Councillor Ord's question, yes, there are significant issues around accommodating the large number of people. I think we saw press reports recently that from a leaked GMSF report suggesting that 30,000 sites for 30,000 homes were needed in Salford over the next 20 years. I think that was slightly misleading because, of course, when I asked officers at my last lead member briefing about this, it appears that the majority of those sites are already in the pipeline and are already planned for brownfield sites in the sort of areas that Councillor Ord referred to. And the challenge there is to make sure that with that dense development we retain the amenity value. That's why I'm determined that we have the park in Greengate, that we
use a second floor.
Councillor Hines, sorry, Councillor Antrobus, you've got 1 minute.
Of course, it's possible for members to move that they give me 5 more minutes if they want to hear the full response. Second flood basin, and of course Irwell River Park, very important amenity facilities that are needed. It remains to be seen how we address the gap, because what the officers were telling me is that although that we've got a number of homes planned in the pipeline, the majority of those are apartments and not enough family homes. So there is a shortfall. It's not 30 sites for 30,000 homes you have to look for, but sites for 4,000 homes, because we must meet the housing need and we must meet that gap in traditional family housing. And we.
Councillor Antrobus, your time's up. Right, can we have questions to Councillor Hines, Lead Member for Finance and Support Services? Any questions? Comments? In the absence of Councillor Stone, Councillor Walsh will take questions. Any questions? Councillor Collinson and Councillor Bolkine. Councillor Collinson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's a proposal to review the level of residential home provision for young people. The emphasis on early intervention and intensive support to families in crisis means that young people are increasingly supported to stay at home. As a result, fewer young people need to stay in residential accommodation. Work is being undertaken to look at how we work differently with neighbouring authorities. Whilst I welcome the fact that the numbers of looked after children in Salford are reducing, and they are, my concern is for the young people who are still in the system, who have been in the system for some considerable time, who still need that residential home provision. We have some, and in particular in the home that I'm attached to, we have some very seriously damaged, traumatised young people. And I really want reassurance that work will continue to go on for those young people to ensure that their long-term outcomes are more positive. At the moment, the staff in the particular children's home that I'm attached to are basically firefighting on a daily basis and are not able to make any positive contribution to those young people's lifestyles. And also I maybe shouldn't say this, but they've just had an Ofsted inspection as a result of one young person, and the home has been downgraded. Excuse me. And one of the reasons is that the advice given in the Regulation 44 reports wasn't adhered to by the local authority. Thank you.
Can I just say we have exactly got 2 minutes. So any business that we don't get through, we will have to bring back to the next council meeting. And so the questions and comments to Councillor Kelly, Lead Member for Adult Services, Health and Wellbeing, and Councillor Ferguson, Workforce and Industrial, I think we'll have to go to the top of the list on the next council meeting. But if there are any questions that members wish to ask, can they actually write to these two lead members with their questions, and I'm sure that you will actually give replies. So I'm sorry, Councillor Bolkine, you can ask your question, but Councillor Walsh, you are not going to be able to have time to answer it.
Madam Chairman, how unfortunate that we cannot hear Councillor Walsh's dulcet tones. My question is, I believe you've had the opportunity of meeting several chairs and vice chairs, governors of schools, And obviously, with the announcement last week, yet again on grammar schools, I'd just like to know how the governors and the chairs and vice chairs have made any comments.
Councillor Walsh, you've got 2 minutes.
Yeah. First of all, Councillor Collinson, I can assure you that obviously we will look into the situation at that particular home. And if you'll meet me outside the meeting, I can give you a detailed response on that. I can assure you that all the rest of the homes and residential care that we give to our children in Salford is of a high standard. If we ever fall below that, then you know that you can come to corporate parenting and we'll discuss it there. But if you've got a particular issue with that home, certainly I'd like to meet you outside of the meeting. Okay? And as for chairs of governors and vice chairs of governors, I think the City Mayor covered the point about grammar schools. But to sum it up, I think we've had a lot of discussion about grammar schools here this morning. I think I could speak for 45 minutes on this, but what I think the government needs to do is to concentrate on the important issues in education. That's about leadership. 34% of deputies, vice principals do not want to become heads. That says a lot about our education system. If we put those resources and that time into leadership, into teaching and learning, into reviewing the farce about assessment that's come about this year, and in fact, if we try and deal with the debilitating effect of Ofsted and relax that, then we will have an education system of which we would be proud, which I would hope would be fully comprehensive. And if you want to look where education really, really works, go to Finland. We have a lot of lessons to learn from Finland, and they have no grammar schools. They did away with them decades ago. Because remember, grammar schools were predicated on a false evidence base in the 1930s by Burt about IQs. We predicated an education system in 1944 on false evidence. It's a decade.
I'm sorry, Councillor Walsh, this is not my doing, but the Council members have voted that we actually finish at 12:30. So with apologies to everybody who wished to speak, who wanted to ask questions and to lead members, and to the reports that have come before us this morning, these will now go to the next meeting, and perhaps we need to think about the length that we actually talk. Thank you very much. Meeting is closed.